Recently, there's been a bit of a resurgence of posts about Gamergate for some reason, and I've never really talked about Gamergate on this channel much, but it is kind of a big thing for the beginnings of this channel. The retro perspective started off when I was writing for a website called Gamesnosh, which was a pro Gamergate website. But what Gamesnosh did really was simply, it was a group of people that talked about games and made articles on games. We never really openly discussed or kind of took sides on these issues when they came about in the Gamergate sort of scope. But my experience with Gamergate begins even before that, when I used to pretty much daily watch and read articles from IGN and GameSpot. I think I was about 17, 18. I would check the site multiple times a day. I didn't have a job, so obviously that was what I spent my time doing. I would probably read most of the articles even if I wasn't really that interested in the particular genre of the game they were covering. And I really looked up to the staff and the writers at both GameSpot and IGN. And I would even go back and watch all the older reviews from like the mid 2000s with, is it Greg Kasavind or something like that? And I think it was Jeff who went on to make Giant Bomb. But there came a point in time where both websites, IGN and GameSpot, were expanding their staff pool a little and making more frequent sort of short news clip style videos. And they got a few British people on as well. And I started to notice a bit of a trend in the type of people that they brought onto the team. You know, the kind of people you might find serving you at CEX with the atrociously bad music taste. But it was a minor niggle because I thought at the end of the day, these guys probably have got the job because they're talented writers and they have an incredible knowledge of video games. One of my favourite features from IGN was the podcast Beyond with Greg Miller and Colin Moriarty, and over the years of me listening to that podcast, they kind of proved that their knowledge of video games wasn't as strong as I initially assumed it to be. I think the crux of the problem with sites like that began to be that these journalists were always looking forward and looking at what games are they playing now and what are they going to move on to next. And whenever they looked back at older games, it never seemed to be from love or nostalgia for those games. It just seemed to be from memory of having maybe played it once. Like when Colin Moriarty exclaimed that The Bouncer on PS2 was a really good PlayStation 2 launch title. It's neither a launch title nor is it really good. Then there came a point where I started to actively dislike Greg Miller because he became so obnoxious with this that the time they were doing, I think it was a top 100 video games of all time, one of the suggestions he got was Dragon Quest VIII, which is my favourite game of all time, and he literally looked at it and was just like, Dragon Quest VIII, not even worth talking about, and just threw it out, you know, without talking about it, without discussing it. No one protested or anything like that. It was just, nope, Dragon Quest VIII is not worth talking about, because JRPGs, as we know from looking at the review scores of all these websites, they're kind of biased against JRPGs. Like, there's not many people on these teams that actually really love JRPGs and will give them fair reviews. Or maybe if he'd have given another JRPG a chance, Ni no Kuni, which I think is brilliant, when it was coming out, he constantly dismissed it as just being another JRPG. And whenever it came up, he would refer to it as Ninu Nana, what a racist twat. I do remember a couple of things with GameSpot. One was the top 5 Skyrim mods of the week, hosted by Seb and Cam, and I always assumed that these had been long-time Elder Scrolls fans. Turned out they got into gaming in like the Xbox 360 era, I believe it was. Maybe the Xbox era, but I think it was the 360 era. So they were basically just normies that had jumped on an advertising bandwagon. I don't want to get into Microsoft stuff here, but you know, that's what I believe it was.
Xbox One and Windows 10 exclusive.
And then it just took the piss when they did an episode on Morrowind and didn't even realise that they'd set up all the mods wrong, so they were trying to use like graphical mods and stuff, and it just looked like the original game, and they were, exclaiming, "Ooh, look at this," and stuff, when it was just the original vanilla game. There was then a kind of final straw moment with GameSpot where when Final Fantasy X and X-2 Remaster came out, there was a comment on the review where they said the facial animations had been greatly improved, and then the same woman who did the review commented in a shorter video after that she hated the facial animations, or it was either that or the other way around. But I just thought that is just blatantly like, you've said one thing on one article and then the complete opposite in another thing. Like, you clearly haven't really thought about that when you've written it in the review. So I thought, you know what, it's time to find some other more independent websites, and I'll just boycott GameSpot and IGN. And that's when I found GamesNosh. And bearing in mind that this boycott wasn't anything to do with Gamergate, because at the time Gamergate hadn't been a thing yet. And that's an important thing to note, because a lot of people who talk about Gamergate in a negative light will say it's nothing to do with games journalism, or it's nothing to do with corruption and cronyism and things like that. There was a lot of stuff I was noticing, and I wasn't even consciously noticing it really most of the time, but I did notice it, and that's what led me to completely stop using IGN and GameSpot before Gamergate was even a thing. And then when Gamergate did come out and it did become a big hashtag and everything, it all clicked, it all made sense to me. And then I just was like, well, all these people that I looked up to that created all this content, this gaming content, why couldn't I do a similar kind of thing and have it actually mean something and really think about the content that I'm putting out, dissect the video games in an honest way? So you may think I'm going to bring up all the stuff with Zoe Quinn again and all that, and the Quinspiracy, but I literally couldn't give a crap about that, really. For me, it was the Game Journo Pros forum which really took the biscuit. A massive campaign, which I believe was led by Colin Moriarty, of all these different gaming websites that colluded together to push a narrative that, quote, gamers are dead, and all publish these articles within, a day of each other, saying that the video gaming community was basically toxic and people should stop labelling themselves as gamers. And this kind of proved what I was getting at earlier about the type of people these websites were hiring. There's clearly some cronyism going on here, and this is clearly a very closed community of journalists. And this closed community doesn't seem to require that you have knowledge of the subject matter that you're meant to be covering, only that you conform to a certain opinion and a certain agenda about video games. I find it really disgusting that the Wikipedia article about Gamergate contains just blatant lies, just complete one-sided, biased article about Gamergate. And a lot of these people that are trying to make out as if this is a campaign of hate against women or against journalists that so-called bigots don't agree with, none of them are saying anything about this Game Journo Pros forum or the collusion between all these journalists, or the corruption that has 100% been uncovered bit by bit in the wake of the Gamergate hashtag. I'm not here to give like a comprehensive list on all these things, but some of the best videos I've seen are a handful by a YouTuber called Leo Pirate. The videos have now been taken down, but there is someone who's re-uploaded them on a different channel.
People often ask me, what has Gamergate accomplished? So many times that I decided to make this video summing it all up because, well, there's a lot. Even though no news outlet will ever admit it, GG has forever changed the discussion of online journalism. But as I always say, actions speak louder than words. Let's list off some of these accomplishments, or as I like to call them, inconvenient facts the news will never talk about. First off, Kotaku and Polygon both updated their public ethics policy to enforce Patreon disclosure. This means if a writer is financially supporting someone they cover, they have to disclose that in their article. Eurogamer, IGN, GamerRanks, and PC Gamer also updated their ethics policy as a direct response to feedback from Gamergate. People in Gamergate actually contacted the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to address and enforce their affiliate disclosure policy.
Native advertising is basically saying to corporations that want to advertise, we will camouflage your ads to make them look like news stories. That's essentially it.
That's essentially it.
Because of this, sites like The Verge and Kotaku now need to add disclosure to articles that are really giant fucking advertisements in disguise. And yes, according to the response from the FTC, Gamergate is directly responsible for this. You're welcome. People are quick to say Gamergate has become a media watchdog group, and for the most part it has. But don't forget how many charities and fundraisers people have also supported. UNICEF, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Center for National Bullying Prevention, and of course, the Fine Young Capitalists. They made a fundraiser to help women make video games. This is the same fundraiser that a certain indie dev bragged about sabotaging on Twitter, because it was in direct competition with their own game jam.
I would highly recommend checking those out, and also deepfreeze.it, which is quite a comprehensive database of corruption in video game journalism. Again, these are things based on observable facts and articles that have been published, and the links to those articles are all there and everything. This isn't like, say, if I was to say, Gamergate is a hate movement that's based on hating women and all that stuff. There's just no actual basis to that beyond the actions of a few people. Just because there are some absolute knobheads out there that would send death threats to women and also be associated with Gamergate does not mean that the movement itself has anything to do with that. That is a fallacious guilt by association attitude, and it's pretty much the prevailing opinion that I've seen if I browse through Twitter and see these recent Gamergate posts cropping up. But as it happens, even though I think these people are very egocentric and self-affirming, I don't really blame them for having that opinion of Gamergate, because I think the fault lies with absolute idiots like Sargon of Akkad, Mr. Repsion and Mundane Matt, which at the time I believe all sort of masqueraded as video game lovers to jump on this massive trend and gain subscribers for their channel, and really appeal to what has now become known as the alt-right, which, just like these people on the left, are absolute maniacs that kind of espouse opinions that they take as fact. They never back up anything they say, and in the case of Sargon of Akkad, purposefully spread misinformation.
Why do we still eat plants? Why do we still eat plants? Yeah. Because they're not sentient? Yeah, but they do feel pain. No, they don't. Yes, they do. No, they don't. I will argue this to death with you. They do not feel pain.
I made the mistake of being subscribed to these channels for a while, but once I realised that they weren't genuine, I unsubscribed, and I've never watched any of their videos since. Like I say, I just like to focus on the games themselves really, and have honest opinions on them, rather than getting into all this political stuff. Finally, I do find it absolutely hilarious that at a time when we're getting a bit of a comeback of these Gamergate posts, and people saying that Gamergate isn't relevant, why are we still talking about it? Stop talking about Gamergate, it's 2020. I see those kinds of comments on Twitter and I disagree with them, of course, because I think Gamergate will always be relevant if you know what it actually is about. But it is so funny that after this happened, Dean Takahashi releases a video of himself playing a video game really, really terribly, which he obviously did with Cuphead. I think this new game footage of Doom is probably even worse than the Cuphead tutorial thing. And yes, I am of the opinion that you need to have at least a basic grasp of video games and video game mechanics to be able to properly critique them. I'm very critical of even people like Jim Sterling, for instance, who gave very positive comments about Fallout 4, when if you look at the gameplay footage that he did in that video, is clearly playing on an easier difficulty and just breezing through the game mindlessly. He's not really thinking about the mechanics of the game or anything like that. He just basically said, yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with it. So yeah, in summary, game journalism does need to be held to a higher standard when there's people out of work who would love to be in this industry and commenting on games and actually have a talent for it and a real knowledge of video games, new and old. There are hundreds of proven cases of corruption in video games journalism that has been documented by Gamergate, which through that has come many positive things. And I think one of the best things that could be taken away from Gamergate as a whole is to stop supporting these massive companies that still to this day hide affiliate links within their articles and all sorts of other shady crap like that, and go out and discover people on YouTube or on other platforms that have a real passion and knowledge for video games. I've been Jake of theretroperspective.com. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.